Paul Gottfried, you've been complaining at this conference, at the last conference, about the American right's failings. Could you begin by defining what you mean by the right?
Well, by the right in general, I'm referring to those forces that consciously oppose the left. As I've argued in the past, I don't think that the right represents an original vision of the world. I think it's, nor does it have any kind of vision of a future based on transforming the human condition. Rather, it is an attempt, very often a desperate attempt, to keep the left from destroying what remains of bourgeois society, of a free market economy, of the Christian morality which has informed bourgeois society. Many of the people who today would identify themselves on the right in an earlier period of time probably would have thought of themselves as liberals in the 19th century sense, not in a 20th century sense. They are not classical conservatives because, as I argue in my book, on what I call baseless conservatism, is the title of the book, the traditional conservative movement is a creature, in many ways, a product of the French Revolution. It's a reaction against the French Revolution. What there is of a right today is made up of the remnants of bourgeois society and members of the working class, or once the working class, which believe in something like family morality, do not want to see their children educated by the managerial state in its present form. So this constitutes the right. The American right, moreover, I would argue, has a tradition of limited government, of constitutionalism. It is historically identified with a largely small-town Protestant America. This right was displaced in many ways by the rise of a more left-leaning Republican Party committed to a large welfare state, and then more recently by the victory of the Neoconservatives, who have totally absorbed what is, I think, mistakenly called the American right.
But surely, Paul, the Neoconservatives, they may not be everything that you'd like them to be, but surely they are still conservatives. I mean, a neoconservative is just a new conservative or a conservative. What is wrong with these people? They are the right as well, aren't they?
No, I think what they represent is a second left, which has been able to take over what I think was a brain-dead conservative movement, or in many cases not a brain-dead conservative movement, but a grasping, unprincipled conservative movement in the United States. They are in no way conservative, except in the sense that they're committed to the perpetuation of a large welfare state and to a foreign policy predicated on the spread of the American democratic model throughout the world. They're not only not conservative, I think in some ways they're probably the left of what is the official left in the United States.
But surely, let's take welfare now. I'm a libertarian, and I'm supposed officially not to approve of the welfare state. But most working people want a welfare state, rightly or wrongly, and it does seem that in many cases, if you give people old-age pensions, subsidised health care, if you give them pensions, it will give them a place in society. Now, Bismarck said this 120 years ago. You buy off radical discontent by giving everybody a stake in society. And so the neoconservatives, they believe in welfare. Well, perhaps we believe in welfare, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's largely a situational problem that we're looking at. I mean, bringing up the example of Bismarck or Disraeli, or in some cases Aristotle, I think is in some ways almost dishonest, because these were people who were trying to preserve class society, a traditional class society. They were conservatives who were trying to prevent a movement toward the democratic left. Bismarck gives social pensions for counter-revolutionary reasons. The neoconservatives, by contrast, are committed not only to the New Deal and the Great Society programs, they are also committed to much of the social engineering that has taken place in the United States over the last 50 years. They celebrate the Civil Rights Act of '64, they celebrate the Voting Rights Act, both of which will involve enormous involvement by the federal government in changing social morality and getting people to accept a different view of their relationship to other people, which will be micromanaged by the central government in the United States. There is the only time these people, the neoconservatives, seem to complain is with the excesses of something like affirmative action. But even here, for them, this is a purely secondary issue because they're quite happy to support presidential candidates who support affirmative action, providing they agree with the neoconservatives on an expansive foreign policy.
Yes. If it turns to foreign policy now, it is, I don't think it's any longer arguable that the American or Allied intervention in Iraq was in any sense wise. It was not justified by events. But surely if you have a very good system of government which respects property rights and civil rights, you may not have a duty to export that to the rest of the world, but it is not an entirely contemptible thing to desire, is it? I mean, do you not want a world in which everybody can have a refrigerator and everybody can have a television set and everybody can go to bed in the sure and certain knowledge they won't be dragged out of bed at 3 in the morning and taken back to a prison?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure that this is really attainable everywhere in the world, nor do I think that it's desired by everybody in the world. I also think what the neoconservatives want to do goes beyond that. I think that they're interested in bringing feminism, gay rights, whatever we have in the United States they want to export. Their notion of human rights or of democracy includes what is American democracy down to the last wrinkle, as far as I can see. What they want to do is simply transform other societies, and they want to use the American military as a means to achieve that end. Now, this is aside from the problem, I might say, the large gorilla that's in the living room, which is their commitment to the Israeli right, and their unwillingness to understand that there is any difference between what is the national interest of the United States in support for somebody like Netanyahu in Israel. And I think that sometimes they've been rightly accused, of using their notions of global democracy to support the right-wing extreme in Israel, to which they are very closely allied. Not even the Sharon right, but I think the Sharansky right, which is a much more extreme right, or the Netanyahu right, to which most of the leading neoconservatives in government, people like Wolfowitz and Veit, are very close.
I see.
And the Heritage Foundation.
Yes, of course. If you exclude the neoconservatives from the right, there doesn't seem to be much remaining, does there?
No, I think that is one of the problems that we face, that the neoconservatives have done to the American right what Adolf Hitler did to the German national right. He has corrupted, suborned, and poisoned the American right. And those people who have run to serve them are immeasurably contemptible people who have absolutely nothing, or no commitment to a free society. They have utterly servile dispositions, including the people who work at AEI, the Heritage Foundation, and most of the conservative infrastructure in the United States. Now, there are some people on the old right who can be rallied. There is a younger generation of people, I'm happy to report, who are either paleoconservatives or paleolibertarians, or just have a general commitment to limited government for the United States. And I think there are a growing number of those people, and many of them are journalism. And the major problem is that they cannot find a national newspaper support from the media. But I think there is the potential for creating a serious right out of those who do not serve the neoconservatives and nor have compromised themselves by building unseemly alliances with them.
I see. So, in England, many people say that conservatism has triumphed in America, even as it's lost in England. We know that we've lost in England. You can see it in the Blair government, you can see it in the institutional changes, in the revolutionary capture of all the leading institutions in my country. But many people in England look on American conservatism as having essentially won. They tell me that there's Fox News, which puts out a very conservative message. There is this immense depth of policy institutes in Washington and in other places. There is a diversity of American conservative movements, which surely means that you are being pessimistic or perhaps just sectarian.
Yeah, first of all, I would point out that one of the great triumphs of British conservatism in the eyes of American conservatives, that is those who serve and work with the neoconservatives, is the victory of Tony Blair. Blair is looked upon as the quintessential British conservative. He's defended as a British conservative because he believes in global democracy, human rights, and stands with us on foreign policy. And he's believed to be a moderate domestically because he has not entirely destroyed what remains of the free market system. His social views are considered to be conservative among American conservatives. He has always given an excellent treatment on Fox News, which I think you described as the conservative news channel, which it is not. What makes Fox Channel different from the other channels is that it backs the Bush Republican Party, which is to say the neocon-controlled Republican Party. Interestingly enough, it very rarely we find on Fox News anybody who would be described as a paleoconservative. The discussions that you see...
What is a paleoconservative?
A paleoconservative is somebody who's positioned to the right of the neoconservatives. You know, when it wishes to push the debate, the political debate rightward. That's what makes you a paleoconservative. If you question the essential principles of the welfare state, if you question the civil rights movement, and you say that it has been corrupted, it was corrupted already by the 1960s, you know, and it had already become the disaster that the neoconservatives sometimes recognize that it did afterwards with its support of affirmative action. If you are critical of the changes that are made in the 1960s, this makes you a paleoconservative. Now, the neoconservatives accept, the neoconservatives in the neoconservative-controlled Fox News accepts all these changes. They support the Voting Rights Act. Most of them support the immigration policies of the Bush administration. They will allow in the debate people who are critics of the immigration position. Anybody who takes a grim view of the welfare state in general and says that it is destructive of the family, destructive of the community, really has no part in their debate. Somebody like Ron Paul is treated like a moron or a madman on Fox News. The person who is the preferred candidate for president is Rudolph Giuliani, who was celebrated as the victor in the last Republican debate. The problem with Fox News is it maintains the status quo, which is a discussion between a neoconservative-controlled Bush Republican Party on the left. And I do not see it really as a force that widens the political discussion.
Well, let's come to immigration. Now, we can perhaps agree that certain kinds of mass immigration are socially disruptive, but surely many of the immigrants that you're receiving in America, are Roman Catholics. They are very conservative in their morality. Many of them are very hard-working. They do jobs that the white working class or the black working class are not willing to do. And surely George W. Bush is not entirely contemptible in his attempts to reach out to these people and to seek to recruit them.
Yeah, the problem is that Fox News and the other neoconservative outlets will not tell you the truth, which is available on vdare.com, the columns of Stephen Seiler, Peter Brimlow's Alienation, and there are many other texts that can be quoted that indicate that illegitimacy rates among the Latino immigrants coming in is about 3 times as high as it is among whites and Asians. Unemployment is much or than the average. Now, it's not as disastrous as the rate of Muslim unemployment in France, or in England, which is in the 40 and 50%. But it is much higher than among whites or Asians in the United States. Crime rate is considerably higher, violent crime, among Latino immigrants. Now, I resent the fact that you're not allowed to vote, and I will not be allowed to vote in either party if the political class and Fox News and the liberal channels all have their way, New York Times, the New York Post. We will not be allowed to vote for a candidate who takes a hard line in immigration. You'll be able to vote for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side and for either Giuliani or McCain on the Republican side, both of whom are probably worse than George Bush and more willing to make amnesties and deals and do anything, to get Latino votes. And since the time that they said that they would put up a wall to keep illegal immigrants coming in from Mexico which was about 10 years ago, until the present, they've only built 5 miles of wall. The wall's supposed to go 1,500 miles. Personally, I doubt that anything will be done to push this project if the new immigration bill is put into law.
I see. Okay, so the conservative movement in America is in perhaps as bad a way as it is in England.
Yes, it is.
Now, what would you do if there were no particular problem with resources? Or rather, let's not talk about resources, that might be part of your answer. What do you think should be done?
Well, I think first, as I've argued in the past, first the real right has to be able to acquire its own television stations, its own national newspapers. Both the Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times recently were put up for sale, and they were bought by liberals in the modern parlance, people who are on the left. You're going to have people on the right being able to put up money and buy TV channels, buy national newspapers, because neither the liberals nor the neoconservatives will let them into the debate.
And, okay, so you bought a television station, you bought a major newspaper. Mm-hmm. Where will you find your personnel to run those?
There's more than enough personnel. There's lots of paleoconservative journalists looking for jobs. I know such people. There's lots of young, intelligent people on our side. They just can't find employment unless they pretend to become neoconservatives. And there are some of them who work for neoconservative foundations.
Now, there is another problem which I've raised, which is that you have acquired a television station and a newspaper, and you have employed sound paleoconservatives to work in those media outlets. But surely those people will always be cautious of what they say, because you will be running the only paleoconservative newspaper and television station, and if for some reason your project fails, these people will be tainted for life. And so even if you have the media outlets, and even if you have the personnel, how will you make sure that those people say what needs to be said?
Well, first of all, many of them have no choice because they're not going to rise very high in neoconservative institutions. Neoconservatives have a class system, so that, somebody like Bill Kristol or John Podhoretz is paid $500,000 or $1 million a year to write for some some crummy neoconservative publication, the people who are under them are probably paid about a tenth of that amount. The Heritage Foundation is the same. There's enormous salary disparities. They have is something like a new aristocracy of cretinous neoconservative offspring, whom we joke about. We call them the mini-cons. And the people who serve under them are not going to rise very high. It is there is a policy of favoritism, nepotism, that exists within neoconservative institutions, and it will not be a problem to pull away the people who are in secondary or tertiary positions to work for us. That can be done. And the conservative websites that have been created. There's one that for which I write that's paid for by Taki, Theodorakopoulos, who is a wealthy paleoconservative Greek who writes a very popular gossip column in the British Spectator.
Yes, Taki is well known in England.
Yeah, but we have many people who are dying to write for us, and they're not afraid that their careers will be destroyed because they appear on our website. Many of them are very talented writers. Some are people who've been kicked out of the Washington Times, which is a moody newspaper that has now been taken over by the neoconservatives.
Okay, let me move the debate forward. You've acquired your media outlets, you've acquired your personnel to work in those, you've encouraged them to say what they believe. What about changing what about bringing about political change in America? That isn't easy, is it?
Okay, it's not that easy, but then you have a candidate like Ron Paul. Now, I suspect that some paleos do not agree entirely with his programs. Generally, however, they are supportive of him. Now, if he were to run for president, then he could siphon off 5 to 10% of the vote, ensuring the well-deserved defeat of Rudy Giuliani against Hillary Clinton, saving us from the greater of the two evils. He would people with his positions would be seen as important ones for politicians to represent, or at least his voters would be seen as a large bloc that has to be wooed. Now, if his electorate and his candidacy were combined with a national newspaper, with a television channel, then we would be in business as a political force, no matter how hard the New York Times and the Weekly Standard and the New York Post and Fox News try to keep us out of the political conversation.
Yes. Very well. Let's now move forward. You have managed to capture the White House, and you have captured a working majority in both houses of Congress. You're facing a left which has been entrenching itself in American public life for at least a century. Now, faced with that, and faced with the decentralized nature of the American system, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can be in your early 20s, you are still, by comparison, an old man in a hurry. How would you bring about deep and long-lasting political change in America?
Okay, well, first of all, if the people were to vote for us, it would show that there is a mandate for change, and that we would have some moral basis on which to bring about certain kinds of reforms. But I don't think that one could overthrow the welfare state at once. I think there's certain other policies that would have to be adopted first. One is decentralization. And we would have to follow Ron Paul's script and go back to something like the dual sovereignty that is present in the original Constitution of the United States. Power would really have to be given back to states, although the states are no better than the federal government, and they usually simply carry out the instructions of the federal government, and the bureaucracies that work for the state governments are indistinguishable from the federal bureaucracy. Nonetheless, I think it would represent a kind of diversity in terms of the governments. There'd be more than one central government running things, and presumably voters in the state of Alabama would be able to influence the government. You also have to break the back of the social engineering judiciary. They can get it whatever it wants. Its power would have to be limited, restricted, and I would hope that in some cases the Congress would stand up at the Supreme Court and say, go to hell, that you do not have a mandate to legislate for the country in the form of judicial remedy. That's one thing. The other thing is that all anti-discrimination programs that exist at the federal level would have to be ended overnight because they have become an excuse for massive behavioral modification and social engineering.
Can you do that by executive fiat in America?
Well, it's something done by presidential order, others would be done by the Congress. But they'd be rescinded. I think that the most dangerous thing that the federal and the state governments have done.
Yes. How would you take control of the bureaucracy to ensure that it did not frustrate you at every step? I have some experience.
The bureaucracy, about a third of the bureaucracy can be cleaned out. The rest of them have tenure. And what can be done is we can try to push them into the private sector if we don't like them, and if we find them obnoxious. Most of them are, of course, committed to liberal programs. They're a force of the left, and they have to be neutralized. If they do not go along with the programs, with the changes, they have to be pushed out.
Yes.
Relentlessly pushed out.
Yes, you see, this is a problem faced by the Thatcher government in the 80s. Now, perhaps it wasn't radical enough, but I do know that when the Thatcher government tried to be radical, it had to work with the existing bureaucratic structures, and it was really like swimming against a strong tide in the English Channel. You strike in one direction, and you find yourself insensibly pushed off course.
Well, that's one of the problems that Nixon faced when he was president. Although he's not a thoroughly principled man, and God knows not a principled conservative, he could not deal with his own bureaucracy, and they helped bring him down, and they leaked all kinds of things about him and so forth. Another problem we have in the States is that you have government agencies, federal agencies, that operate in an extra-constitutional fashion, and have at least since the New Deal. They have judicial power. They do all kinds of things, while supposedly belonging to Congress or to the executive. But the Civil Rights Commission, for instance, goes well beyond whatever its original mandate was. I mean, it does things, for instance, like reaching down at every level and pushing what I suppose the French might call positive discrimination in one way or another, or going after universities, schools, anybody who gets federal money or in one way or another, and it's all state money because they have state agencies as well, and trying to push them into making certain kinds of hiring decisions and so forth. The question is, to what extent can this be seen as, the business of the federal government in the United States? I don't think it can. I mean, it's very hard for me to see how one can justify this in terms of the Constitution of the United States.
Yes. And then there's a further problem. Many of my friends in England say that the BBC should be privatised, but as far as I can tell, if the BBC were privatised and took paid advertising, it would still remain the same poisonous left-wing media force that it has been for the past 50 years. Now, you have things like the Ford Foundation.
Yes.
All of these institutions which are privately funded, and they would carry on regardless of whatever changes you might try to bring about in government.
Yes, in the American case, public radio or public television is probably a minor force in terms of pushing the American political spectrum leftward. The regular network news and the broadcast, whether it be the sitcoms, Hollywood, and public education, particularly public education, have the same effect. even without, an institution like the British Broadcasting.
So, what would you do about the privatised institutions of the left, like Hollywood, like the established networks on television, as you said, the situation comedies, the soap operas, which all promote the same agenda of radical social change?
Well, absolutely. I mean, of the left.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know what you can do. They are, as I said, I always compare them to the medieval church. They represent a second state within your country. I don't know what you can even. I recognize that they pose an enormous problem, and that is. But of course, we're assuming that the American people, despite all these forces, have voted for a government of the right.
Once.
Yeah, once. Okay. Now, I assume these people, the media would go absolutely crazy and say we've been taken over by something worse than the Nazis.
Yes.
Yeah. They might lose their credibility once they've said that.
Would you be willing to try a Henry VIII solution of seizing control of private assets and redistributing them?
Yeah, well, this can be done in the United States because we have something like the Federal Communications Commission. There is the government does have the power to regulate and has regulated communications. Since the introduction of radios in the United States, this was one of the major accomplishments of the New Deal. Was this kind of regulation? Now, the right, of course, has never really benefited very much from this. And I suppose in principle we're against this. I am morally against this, but would I be willing to make an end run and use this to crush the left? Yes, I would. Without thinking twice. Before it is too late.
You will win one election. And if you want to win a second election, you will need to do something.
You'd have to crush it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would be prepared to use, you would be prepared to act with a degree of ruthlessness against these people.
We'd have to vote for something or do something like the act of supremacy, take over the state church.
Yes. Okay, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, I found this a very interesting exchange between people who generally agree.
Yes.
What is to be done, que faire. I think you sort of push me into taking a position toward which I incline that, we have to do something like the act of supremacy if we win one election.
Yes.
State universities, I think, can be brought along because they depend upon state funding.
Let me break in. What do you think of the Marxist analysis of power and of revolution? The end to which they were aiming was always worthless. It ran against human nature. But these people could often come up with some very perceptive analyses of how to seize and use the institutions of the state to achieve the outcome they desired.
But I would argue that one of the reasons they're so effective is that mass democracy moves you in that direction. And this is the argument in my book, After Liberalism, that it's not that you're dealing with the 19th century Victorian society. You're dealing with people who want massive income redistribution, and as soon as they're allowed to vote, they support this, and they give their power away to a bureaucratic class, to scientific administrators to redistribute things in their favor. So you have the myth of public administration, the myth of scientific administration, and the victory of mass democracy. That is, everybody votes and looks to the state to provide for them and to redistribute income. And from the time that change takes place, social engineering comes along, the progressive era in the United States, with the victory of the new liberals in England, with the creation of the welfare state on the continent, so that things have to move more or less in the direction in which they have gone. Now, I say more or less because you do have attempts to moderate the system. You have Christian democracy, you have the Catholic workers movement, all these other things. but everything moves generally in the direction of public administration presiding over an egalitarian system, colonizing the family, controlling the education of the young, right with the liberation of women against men, of atheists against Christianity. I mean, the general direction in which they have moved should be no surprise to us.
Yes. Well, what I'm asking is, how far would you be prepared to go in unleashing a revolutionary terror against the forces of the left? You may have won a couple of elections, but you remain a small revolutionary class committed to change in the face of a century-old entrenched leftist hegemony.
Yeah, well, this is an argument that a Swedish friend tells me goes on in Sweden. Because you have people who are, probably semi-fascist, as a kind of Charles XII society, and their view is that the Social Democrats have been so long entrenched in Sweden that they have reconstructed people to a point that it would take an active counter-revolutionary government, what Carl Schmitt would call a provisional dictatorship, to change things. I think this is absolutely correct. It would take a provisional dictatorship to break the backbone of the left, the entrenched left at this point.
So you would use all of the despotic instruments accumulated by the American left during the past century
to destroy it.
Yes.
Yes, I would. The other thing that has to be, immigration has to be ended.
Yeah.
I mean, we can let Slovaks come in or Irish or something. No more Latinos. It has to end. None of them.
Yes.
You can let Europeans. You can let some Asians come in. That's fine. The rupture, with the southern border must be closed. The porous borders have to be closed, and we have to work as hard as we can to send most of those people back to their countries of origin.